Oakbridge Hills, a suburban development on the edge of a mid-sized American city, appeared postcard-perfect at first glance. Rows of tidy townhouses and single-story homes lined gently curving streets. Each driveway and yard was carefully maintained, courtesy of the local homeowners association's strict guidelines. Newly planted trees offered shade, while small parklets dotted the neighborhood with benches for casual socializing. But beneath the polished veneer ran a current of discontent. Residents whispered about how the HOA, intended to keep property values high, had instead become a vehicle for nitpicking. Citations for minor infractions, like leaving a trash bin on the curb an extra hour, piled up. Rules, once meant to preserve community harmony, now seemed to stifle personal expression. To some, living in Oakbridge Hills felt like being under constant surveillance. While a handful of HOA board members were reasonable, one in particular, HOA Karen, held an outsized influence. She championed an uncompromising vision of uniformity, scolding neighbors for perceived slights against that standard. Over time, her endless stream of warnings and demands fueled resentment. However, few openly defied her, fearing retaliatory fines or formal proceedings. The tension simmered quietly, until one balmy spring day, Karen crossed a line by destroying a beloved elder's chess table in a public, violent act. Her meltdown would galvanize Oakbridge Hills to re-examine not just the rules, but the entire spirit of neighborly life. And ironically, the very fixture she smashed would be replaced by something more permanent and cherished than ever. Teresa Arnett was in her late 40s, with a precisely trimmed bob of auburn hair that never seemed ruffled by the wind. She wore pastel blouses and crisp slacks, carrying herself with the poise of someone who believed she spoke for the community's greater good. When she moved to Oakbridge Hills 7 years earlier, she quickly joined the HOA board, claiming she wanted to protect property values and community aesthetics. In truth, Teresa's neighbors recognized traits of a classic Karen, a deep conviction that she alone knew best, coupled with a willingness to escalate small problems into crises. Over time, her approach to enforcement turned from helpful reminders into a campaign of intimidation. She cited obscure bylaw clauses about paint colors, lawn ornaments, or the acceptable height of rose bushes. Many residents called her Karen behind her back, a nod to the viral meme of an overbearing, self-entitled woman demanding to speak to the manager. The moniker fit all too well. She never explicitly used the label to describe herself, but rumor had it she'd raged at a grocery store clerk who recognized her from the neighborhood and slipped the name in conversation. To Karen, any gathering on community land was suspect, particularly if it lingered too long or seemed unregulated. Kids chalking hopscotch on the sidewalk. She'd fret about scuffing the pavement. A family barbecuing? She emailed them about fire hazards. In her view, the best neighbors were those who remained inconspicuous, conforming to the strictest reading of the HOA guidelines. Still, few predicted she would physically destroy something in a rage. She had threatened, scolded, and even confiscated minor items, but smashing an entire table was unthinkable until she reached a breaking point over an unassuming group of retirees playing chess under a shady oak tree. For about a year, a small group of senior residents had convened in a tucked-away corner of the community's main green space, where a large oak spread its branches. They called themselves the Oakbridge Chess Circle. The ringleader was Walter Smith, a retired teacher with a quiet but welcoming demeanor. Others included Dorothy, a sharp-minded widow who had learned chess decades ago, and Harold, whose occasional forgetfulness was offset by moments of strategic brilliance. At first, the group played on portable boards, bringing foldable chairs from home. They'd meet a few times a week when the weather was pleasant. The slow-paced clack of chess pieces, the hush of concentration, and the gentle breezes through oak leaves offered a serene pastime. Sometimes passers-by lingered to watch a match. A few even joined in, discovering a new hobby or reigniting an old passion. As the circle grew to about 8 core members, they decided it would be nice to have a more permanent table. So with a neighbor's help, they built a sturdy wooden chess table that sat atop a simple stand, placed in the shade. The table featured hand-drawn squares sealed under clear varnish, strong enough to endure occasional rain. A few basic folding chairs completed the setup, The arrangement wasn't especially fancy or imposing, but for the retirees who gathered, it felt like a small slice of camaraderie, a reason to step outside, exercise their minds, and connect with others. This modest presence hadn't drawn official complaint for many months. Residents found the circle charming, an example of how the shared green space could foster community. But Karen took a different view. She eyed the gatherings with suspicion, seeing them as people loitering in communal areas, blocking potential use by others. Her disapproval smoldered quietly, until one day, it flared. Karen's hostility toward the chess circle surfaced in subtle ways at first. She'd stroll by during a match, arms folded, wearing a tight-lipped expression of disapproval. Sometimes she'd remark, always the same people out here, or comment about tripping hazards from extra chairs. Walter once overheard her mention excessive occupant usage, implying the group was monopolizing the green space. Dorothy bristled at the suggestion, but let it go. No one wanted a direct confrontation. Over time, Karen began citing obscure references to communal area usage. She posted bulletins on the HOA forum about new guidelines for extended gatherings, hinting that permanent structures in shared spaces were not allowed unless the board approved them. While these bulletins never specifically named the chess circle, the seniors felt targeted. Their table was not permanent in the sense of being cemented in, but it was heavier than a typical fold-out. They worried Karen might be building a case to remove it. They tried to quell her concerns. Walter approached Karen politely one morning, explaining that they used minimal space, always left the area clean, and welcomed any neighbor who wanted to play. She responded with a patronizing smile. "I'm sure you mean well, but the rules must be enforced for everyone's sake," she said. "We can't have unsanctioned structures causing clutter." Frustrated, but still not wanting open conflict, the chess circle continued as usual, trusting that the HOA board as a whole was more reasonable. They had no idea Karen was working behind the scenes to rally support for removing that bulky eyesore. Nor did they suspect her frustration would reach such a breaking point that she'd physically destroy the table, something unthinkable in a quiet suburban park. As spring deepened, more residents took advantage of the pleasant weather. The green space around the oak tree bustled with joggers, dog walkers, and families letting kids roam. The chess circle thrived in this atmosphere, scheduling meetups 3 or 4 times a week. Onlookers found it heartwarming to see an activity bridging generations. Sometimes a teen or middle-aged passerby joined in for a friendly match. Karen, meanwhile, found the crowd irritating. She believed the chess circle's near-constant presence dominated the best shade in the park. In her mind, it set a precedent for others to bring unapproved furniture. She took photos from a distance, capturing the group mid-match or the table anchored under the tree. On the forum, she wrote posts about public resources being commandeered, though few residents shared her indignation. Tensions escalated one Saturday afternoon when a small birthday picnic happened near the oak tree. The kids played tag, the seniors continued chess, and an older couple took a leisurely walk. Karen arrived, eyes scanning for violations. She confronted Walter, insinuating that the chess group was interfering with other families who might want the spot. Walter calmly pointed out there was plenty of room. The family hosting the picnic affirmed the chess circle was no bother. Karen huffed off, but her expression hinted she wasn't done. The seniors conferred privately, worried. Dorothy had read Karen's forum posts. She predicted Karen might push the board to forcibly remove the table. Harold believed they had public support. Didn't the neighbors enjoy seeing them gather? Yes, Dorothy agreed. But Karen wields real authority, and she's not afraid to push her agenda. They resolved to stand firm if confronted. Yet none guessed how abrupt and violent her confrontation would be. The day of the incident dawned mild and clear. Walter, Dorothy, and Harold planned to meet early to enjoy coffee and a casual chess session, hoping to beat the midday heat. They arrived around 8 a.m., setting up a single board on the wooden table, placing a few comfortable fold-up chairs around it. Birds chirped overhead, and sunlight filtered softly through new leaves, creating dappled patterns on the grass. They chatted about weekend plans. Dorothy's granddaughter was visiting, Harold needed to fix a squeaky gate, and Walter mused about possibly painting a larger chessboard on the table's surface. The mood was relaxed, as if the oak tree itself offered a gentle sanctuary. Halfway into their first game, a neighbor strolled by, complimenting their consistent presence. Dorothy took a sip of coffee, remarking how these morning matches had become her favorite pastime. Karen, however, was on the prowl. She had already completed her usual inspection of the neighborhood, scanning for unapproved lawn ornaments or trash bins left out. Spotting the seniors at their usual post, she felt a rush of irritation. The table was still there, large and visible under the oak. She'd grown convinced that their ignoring her warnings was a direct challenge to her authority. She had even tried emailing the board's president about illegal structures, but was told they'd discuss it at the next monthly meeting. That wasn't good enough for Karen. From a distance, she watched the trio focusing on the chessboard. Her anger grew. This needed to end. She believed the seniors were ignoring the common courtesy of sharing space. In her mind, the best approach was to remove the problem entirely. If the table vanished, so would the chess circle. She told herself that once it was gone, the board could pass an official rule, preventing them from reinstalling it. Then Oakbridge Hills would remain tidy, free from unsightly gatherings. No one, including Karen herself, fully anticipated how explosive her confrontation would become. But the seething sense of being disrespected fueled a reckless impulse to act. Before approaching the seniors, Karen paced along a nearby sidewalk, mustering her nerve and rationalizing her plan. She considered waiting for them to leave, then dragging the table away. But the table was quite heavy. And would that not cause a scene? Another idea, call the HOA security volunteer, but they had no real power to forcibly remove property. In Karen's mind, the direct approach seemed best. She'd confront them, demand the table's removal, and if they refused, she'd tip it over to show she meant business. She was well aware that physically damaging someone else's property was frowned upon, potentially criminal. But she believed the table belonged to the community's land, not the seniors. And from her perspective, it was an unauthorized fixture. In her twisted logic, she saw herself as performing the rightful cleanup job the board lacked the courage to do. Her frustration soared as she recalled how the seniors had brushed off her earlier requests to remove the table. She felt personally slighted, as though they were mocking her authority. That combination of pent-up resentment and misguided self-righteousness was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The morning's tranquil setting only fueled her sense that she had to take decisive action now, while the circle was small and less likely to resist. Thus, filled with simmering rage, Karen strode across the grass toward the oak tree. The seniors looked up, momentarily startled. Her posture was rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. Dorothy, sensing trouble, gently set aside her coffee. Walter paused mid-move on the board. Harold glanced around as though searching for an escape route. In that tense hush, Karen launched into demands that would quickly escalate into an act of destruction none of them predicted. Karen halted a few feet from the table, arms folded. The seniors felt the weight of her glare. In a clipped tone, she declared, "I've warned you enough. This table is not authorized. I'm giving you one final chance. Remove it, or I will." Walter, taken aback, tried to reason with her. "Karen, we have a right to enjoy the public green. We're not blocking anything. The board hasn't." "I am the board," Karen snapped, though it was obviously untrue that she alone constituted the entire HOA. "You refused to comply with prior notices. Now it goes." She marched toward the table, placing her hands on one edge. The seniors leaped from their chairs, alarmed. "Wait!" Dorothy exclaimed, stepping forward. "We can discuss this civilly." But Karen, adrenaline coursing, heaved the table upward with surprising force. Chess pieces clattered across the surface, scattering onto the grass. The seniors cried out, "Stop!" as the heavy wooden top lurched precariously. In a swift motion, Karen angled the table and sent it toppling sideways. A thunderous crack echoed as one leg snapped against a tree root. The board bounced, catapulting pawns and knights deeper into the lawn. Walter, shaken, nearly lost his balance. Dorothy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Harold's eyes went wide with dismay. For a split second, the group stared in stunned silence at the broken table. Karen, breathing heavily, glared at them. "You people hog this space all day," she spat. "You have no right." Confusion and outrage surged among the seniors. Dorothy's voice quivered. "How dare you?" Walter, trembling with anger, said, "This is our property you just destroyed. We built it ourselves. Karen snapped back. It's on common ground. You had no permission. Then, with a final huff, she turned on her heel and stomped away, leaving the table in splinters, the chess set scattered like fallen leaves. For a long moment, no one moved. Dorothy felt tears prickle. Harold rested a hand on Walter's shoulder, too shocked for words. In that instant, the once peaceful patch under the oak tree became the epicenter of a conflict that would soon reverberate throughout Oakbridge Hills. As Karen disappeared from view, the seniors tried to collect themselves. Dorothy's heart pounded, her anger mingling with disbelief. Harold stooped, his knee complaining, to pick up scattered pawns, rooks, a battered king piece lying in the grass. Walter pressed a trembling hand to his temple, muttering, "I can't believe she actually broke it." Other residents who'd been strolling nearby hurried over, drawn by the commotion. They gasped at the scene, the table lying on its side, one leg snapped clean off, chess pieces littered. The once lively tree area looked like a crime scene. Some tried to comfort the seniors, while others cursed Karen's name. Walter explained haltingly what had happened. A hush of rage and empathy enveloped the onlookers. One neighbor pulled out a phone, offering to call the local police or at least a security officer from the HOA. Another suggested photographing the damage as evidence. Dorothy, though still shaken, nodded. "We should document everything," she said. "This can't go unpunished." Meanwhile, the morning sunshine felt jarringly incongruous with the violence just witnessed. The shattered table had been a symbol of quiet fellowship for the elders. Now it lay in a pile of splintered wood, the scribbled squares half obscured by dirt. Harold placed the broken king piece on top of the table's remains, as if it were a fallen soldier. The group soon gathered to help salvage what they could. "We'll store the fragments, maybe fix it," said a neighbor, though the table looked beyond simple repair. Another approached the seniors gently, urging them to file a complaint with the HOA board. Walter, fighting tears of frustration, agreed. "We can't just let her do this. She's destroyed our property. She has to be held accountable." Though they didn't realize it yet, this moment marked a turning point in Oakbridge Hills. Karen's violent act was so blatant, so indefensible, that it stirred a wave of community solidarity. The seeds of transformation had been sown under that oak tree, in the shards of a cherished chess table. Word of the incident spread rapidly through Oakbridge Hills. People recounted how Karen attacked the elders' chess table, each retelling stoking outrage. Most had found Karen's meddling annoying in the past, but physically destroying an item dear to the seniors? That crossed a line. Social media groups lit up with condemnation, urging immediate action. In the afternoon, Walter, Dorothy, and Harold, still rattled, drafted a statement for the next HOA meeting. They described the table's destruction, the threat Karen had made, and how she physically flipped it in front of them. A neighbor, Amanda, who had a legal background, volunteered to help them compile relevant evidence, including photos of the broken table and statements from witnesses. Another resident offered to contact the local police to see if a property damage report was warranted. Throughout the day, visitors came to check on the seniors, bringing small gestures, homemade cookies, supportive notes, or just an ear for them to vent. Dorothy was touched. "I never realized so many people cared," she remarked tearfully. Walter nodded, suspecting that Karen had finally overreached, uniting neighbors in a way that smaller acts of intimidation never had. An impromptu meeting took place in a neighbor's living room that evening, attended by a dozen concerned residents. They discussed how best to confront Karen's behavior. Some advocated for a formal complaint to the HOA board, demanding her removal. Others wondered if the chess circle could be recognized officially, so their table or a new version would be protected from future sabotage. Ultimately, they agreed on a two-pronged approach: press charges, or at least file a police complaint for vandalism, and petition the board to install a permanent, community-endorsed chess table so that Karen could not tear it down again. As the group disbanded, a sense of purpose emerged. They refused to let Karen's cruelty overshadow the seniors' quiet pastime. If anything, they intended to come back stronger, building something that even Karen couldn't budge. The following week's HOA board meeting was packed. Normally, these sessions drew a small crowd, but now the communal hall filled beyond capacity with residents eager to address Karen's actions. The board's president, an older man named Arthur Liu, appeared anxious as he called the meeting to order. He'd received dozens of emails about the incident. Karen, for her part, sat stiffly at the board table, arms folded, wearing a pastel blouse that clashed with her tense posture. She avoided eye contact with the crowd. The moment the floor opened for public comments, Dorothy, accompanied by Walter and Harold, approached the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted how Karen arrived that morning, threatened them, and flipped the table. Harold held up pictures of the shattered wood, eliciting gasps and murmurs among the audience. An outpouring of condemnations followed from neighbors. Some demanded Karen's immediate resignation from the board, calling her dangerous and unfit to represent us. Others proposed that the HOA cover the cost of a new table, this time something permanent and official. One father, who sometimes taught his son basic moves at that very table, insisted that the green space was for everyone, not just for those who conformed to Karen's personal whims. Karen, given a chance to respond, tried to defend herself by citing overuse of communal property and unapproved structures. But her rationalizations landed flat. The crowd booed. Another board member, an even-tempered woman named Felicia, expressed dismay. "No bylaw allows you to physically remove property with force," she said. "We do not condone vandalism, especially directed at our senior residents." In the end, the board announced it would convene a closed executive session to consider disciplinary action against Karen. As for the chess table, they promised to consider a motion to place a permanent fixture in the green space, ensuring that older residents, and indeed anyone, could use it. The meeting closed with a palpable tension. Karen left swiftly, ignoring neighbors who glared at her or tried to confront her. Meanwhile, the seniors, though still shaken, felt a spark of hope that real justice might be served. In the days that followed, Oakbridge Hills buzzed with speculation. Would Karen be removed from the board or merely censured? Would the board truly fund a permanent chess table? Residents lobbied the board for a quick, decisive solution, eager to prevent further conflict. The momentum was on the seniors' side. They'd become local heroes of sorts, emblems of community spirit battered by petty tyranny. A subcommittee formed to explore installing a stone or concrete chess table, akin to those in public parks, with built-in seats. This arrangement would be immovable, thus safe from sabotage. The HOA had some funds earmarked for park improvements, and a local stonemason offered discounted labor. The idea was popular. Not only would it replace what Karen destroyed, but it would also serve as a new amenity for all ages. Walter and Dorothy were consulted on the design, specifying standard chessboard squares etched into the tabletop. The plan included 2 or 4 attached seats, making it friendly for both pairs of players or small groups. Harold joked about how Karen definitely can't flip a giant slab of stone, capturing the sentiment that this structure would stand for neighborly resilience. Meanwhile, the subcommittee also drafted a revised usage policy for the green space, clear guidelines that recognized regular gatherings, like a chess circle, as beneficial rather than hogging space. This shift represented a symbolic pivot from Karen's punitive stance to a more inclusive approach. Indeed, the project's tagline on the HOA forum became "a table for everyone," signifying the community's desire to unify rather than exclude. Though Karen's presence loomed, her voice on the forum diminished. She posted a few defensive remarks, only to be met with scorn. Despite lacking official news on her discipline, it was clear she was losing influence, while the permanent chess table gained unstoppable momentum. As the push for the stone chess table gathered steam, Karen found herself increasingly isolated. The other board members avoided siding with her, mindful of the public outrage. Even neighbors who once grudgingly respected her strictness now deemed her unhinged. Her attempts to champion new regulations or lodge minor complaints fell on deaf ears. Fueling her frustration, the police had visited her regarding a formal complaint for property damage. While no immediate arrest was made, she faced the possibility of a misdemeanor charge. Karen ranted about the ungrateful seniors who forced her hand. But privately, she worried about legal consequences. Her lawyer advised her to remain quiet and let the HOA proceedings play out. Friends she'd once counted on for support distanced themselves, uncertain how to reconcile her vandalism with their desire for neighborhood harmony. As a result, Karen spent more time cooped up in her house, scanning social media from behind the curtains. She watched with indignation as updates about the new chess table soared in popularity, neighbors praising the community spirit that overcame her destructive act. Meanwhile, a recall petition circulated quietly among residents who believed Karen should be removed from the board entirely. They garnered signatures from a broad cross-section of the neighborhood. Some predicted that once the new table was unveiled, the board might use the public goodwill to finalize her removal. For Karen, each day brought a fresh wave of shame and resentment. The more she fumed about losing control, the less the community heeded her. The power she once wielded as an enforcer of petty rules slipped away, replaced by a sense that her meltdown had ironically solidified the very unity she detested. And soon, she'd be forced to confront that unity face to face. Construction of the permanent chess table began in earnest one sunny weekend. A group of volunteers, along with a hired stoneworker, arrived at the oak tree. They cleared a level foundation, poured a concrete pad, and carefully set the stone table. Thick seats extended from each side, ensuring stability and accessibility for older players. The etched board in the center boasted crisp black and white squares polished to a smooth finish. The entire structure weighed hundreds of pounds, virtually impossible to tip without heavy machinery. A small crowd gathered to watch. Walter, Dorothy, and Harold beamed as each stage progressed, occasionally offering suggestions to the stonemason. Children played nearby, and passers-by snapped photos for the HOA forum. A sense of festivity filled the air, like building a new neighborhood landmark. Someone even brought cupcakes, handing them out to volunteers. By afternoon, the table stood complete, gleaming under the dappled sunlight. A hush fell as Walter gingerly placed a brand-new chess set on the squares, 2 sets of pieces in glossy plastic. Dorothy patted the stone, remarking how it felt, like it's been here forever. Harold, smiling widely, said, "Karen will have a tough time toppling this one." People spontaneously applauded, cheering for the symbolic victory. In that moment, the destructive memory of Karen's rampage was replaced by communal pride. Word quickly spread, and by evening, families visited to see the new table, some even playing quick matches. The old wooden table might lie in ruin, but its spirit was reborn in stone, an unbreakable testament to neighborly fellowship. A few days after the table's installation, the HOA held a special ceremony to officially unveil the new chess fixture. A dozen or more residents, plus the board members, minus Karen, gathered at the oak tree. The board's president gave a brief speech praising the seniors' resilience and reaffirming that the green space was for everyone. Walter and Dorothy each said a few words, expressing gratitude for the community's support and hoping the table brought people together for many years. Karen arrived late, standing off to the side. The hush that followed her appearance was palpable. Residents parted in an invisible circle, avoiding her. She watched the ceremony with a stony expression, perhaps hoping for a chance to speak. But no one invited her to the microphone. This was a moment she had no role in, except as the impetus for the table's creation. At the ceremony's end, neighbors lined up to play short blitz matches. Laughter and friendly banter replaced any lingering tension. Karen lingered briefly, as if waiting for someone to approach, but found only cold shoulders or polite nods. She turned and left, her figure retreating down the path in silence. A few people shook their heads, recalling how just weeks ago, she'd violently toppled a wooden table here. In the following days, the board announced they were suspending Karen from active duties for the remainder of her term. The recall petition also neared the required signatures, making her departure from the board likely. Rumors suggested she might move away to avoid further embarrassment. Whether she stayed or not, the chess table had become a permanent fixture of Oakbridge Hills, a daily reminder that the community's unity overshadowed one person's aggression. Life in Oakbridge Hills resumed with a newfound sense of harmony. The stone chess table quickly became a popular gathering spot, not just for seniors, but for younger folks as well. Even on weekday mornings, you might see Dorothy teaching a neighbor's grandchild the basics, or Walter analyzing a puzzle with an old friend. Harold sometimes lingered to chat with passers-by about everything from local news to gardening tips. The lingering presence of Karen's meltdown served as a cautionary tale. People recognized that extreme enforcement of minor rules could morph into something destructive. The HOA, chastened, began revisiting other guidelines to ensure they balanced community standards with personal freedoms. They introduced clearer processes for approving new ideas, hoping to foster a spirit of collaboration rather than fear. Walter, Dorothy, and Harold found their circle expanding. Some new players, spurred by curiosity, joined the weekly sessions. With an official table that no single individual could remove, they felt secure in their pastime. The memory of the broken wooden table still stung, but the outpouring of neighborly support had turned tragedy into triumph. Dorothy loved to say, "You can't keep the good game down," referencing how even a single flipped board couldn't kill the joy of chess. As for Karen, her influence diminished to near irrelevance. She was neither consulted nor welcomed in local decisions. Though she remained a private homeowner, her once fearsome aura had evaporated. The neighborhood thrived without her meddling, and many believed that was best for everyone. In time, the story of the broken chess table evolved into a local legend, often retold at block parties or neighborly get-togethers. People spoke of how the destructive outburst became a catalyst for unity, culminating in a stone table that symbolized the community's resilience. The oak tree, shading that immovable fixture, bore silent witness to the transformation, a living testament that neighborly bonds, once forged, could withstand even the fiercest attempt to break them.